sightings that never were released and that we never received at ATIC through official channels. Ever since the fateful day when Lieutenant Jerry Cummings dropped his horn-rimmed glasses down on his nose, tipped his head forward, peered at Major General Cabell over his glasses, and, acting not at all like a first lieutenant, said that the UFO investigation was all fouled up, Project Grudge had been gaining prestige. Lieutenant Colonel Rosengarten's promise that I'd be on the project for only a few months went the way of all military promises. By March 1952, Project Grudge was no longer just a project within a group. We had become a separate organization with the formal title of the Aerial Phenomena Group. Soon after this step up in the chain of command, the project code name was changed to Blue Book. The word grudge was no longer applicable. For those people who like to try to read a hidden meaning into a name, I'll say that the code name Blue Book was derived from the title given to college tests. Both the tests and the project had an abundance of equally confusing questions. Project Blue Book had been made a separate group because of the steadily increasing number of reports we were receiving. The average had jumped from about 10 a month to 20 a month since December 1951. In March of 1952, the reports slacked off a little, but April was a big month. In April, we received 99 reports. On April 1st, Colonel S.H. Kirkland and I went to Los Angeles on business. Before we left ATIC, we had made arrangements to attend a meeting of the Civilian Saucer Investigators, a now defunct organization that was very active in 1952. They turned out to be a well-meaning but Don Quixote-type group of individuals. As soon as they outlined their plans for attempting to solve the UFO riddle, it was obvious that they would fail. Project Blue Book had the entire Air Force, money, and enthusiasm behind it, and we weren't getting any answers yet. All this group had was the enthusiasm. The highlight of the evening wasn't the Civilian Saucer Investigators, however. It was getting a chance to read Ginna's UFO article in an advance copy of Life magazine that the organization had obtained. The article written from the material Bob Ginna had been researching for over a year. Colonel Kirkwood took one long look at the article, sidled up to me, and said, "We'd better get back to Dayton quick. You're going to be busy." The next morning at dawn, I was sound asleep on a United Airlines DC-6, Dayton bound. The Life article undoubtedly threw a harder punch at the American public than any other UFO article ever written. The title alone, "Have We Visitors from Outer Space?" was enough. Other very reputable magazines, such as True, had said it before, but coming from Life, it was different. Life didn't say that the UFOs were from outer space, it just said maybe. But to back up this maybe, it had quotes from some famous people. Dr. Walther Riedel, who played an important part in the development of the German V-2 missile, and is presently the director of rocket engine research for North American Aviation Corporation, said he believed that the UFOs were from outer space. Dr. Maurice Biot, one of the world's leading aerodynamicists, backed him up. But the most important thing about the Life article was the question in the minds of so many readers. Why was it written? Life doesn't go blasting off on flights of space fancy without a good reason. Some of the readers saw a clue in the author's comments that the hierarchy of the Air Force was now taking a serious look at UFO reports. Did the Air Force prompt Life to write the article? Was the question that many people asked themselves. When I arrived at Dayton, newspapermen were beating down the door. The official answer to the Life article was released through the Office of Public Information in the Pentagon. The article is factual, but Life's conclusions are their own. In answer to any questions about the articles being Air Force that we had furnished Life with some raw data on specific sightings. My answer was purposely weasel-worded because I knew that the Air Force had unofficially inspired the Life article. The maybe they're interplanetary, with the maybe bordering on they are, was the personal opinion of several very high-ranking officers in the Pentagon, so high that their personal opinion was almost policy. I knew the men, and I knew that one of them, a general, had passed his opinions on to Bob Ginna. Oddly enough, the Life article did not cause a flood of reports. The day after the article appeared, we got 9 sightings, which was unusual. But the next day they dropped off again. The number of reports did take a sharp rise a few days later, however. The cause was the distribution of an order that completed the transformation of the UFO from a bastard son to the family heir. The piece of paper that made Project Blue Book legitimate was Air Force Letter 200-5, subject, Unidentified Flying Objects. The letter, which was duly signed and sealed by the Secretary of the Air Force, in essence stated that UFOs were not a joke, that the Air Force was making a serious study of the problem, and that Project Blue Book was responsible for the study. The letter stated that the commander of every Air Force installation was responsible for forwarding all UFO reports to ATIC by wire, with a copy to the Pentagon. Then a more detailed report would be sent by airmail. Most important of all, it gave Project Blue Book the authority to directly contact any Air Force unit in the United States without going through any chain of command. This was almost unheard of in the Air Force and gave our project a lot of prestige. The new reporting procedures established by the Air Force letter greatly aided our investigation, because it allowed us to start investigating the better reports before they cooled off. But it also had its disadvantages. It authorized the sender to use whatever priority he thought the message warranted. Some things are slow in the military, but a priority message is not one of them. When it comes to the message center, it is delivered to the addressee immediately, and for some reason, all messages reporting UFOs seem to arrive between midnight and 4 a.m. I was considered the addressee on all UFO reports. To complicate matters, the messages were usually classified, and I would have to go out to the airbase and personally sign for them. One such message came in about 4:30 a.m. on May 8, 1952. It was from a CAA radio station in Jacksonville, Florida, and had been forwarded over the Flight Service teletype net. I received the usual telephone call from the teletype room at Wright-Patterson. I think I got dressed, and I went out and picked up the message. As I signed for it, I remember the night man in the teletype room said, "This is a Lulu, Captain." It was a Lulu. About 1 o'clock that morning, a Pan American Airlines DC-4 was flying south toward Puerto Rico. A few hours after it had left New York City, it was out over the Atlantic Ocean, about 600 miles off Jacksonville, Florida, flying at 8,000 feet. It was a pitch-black night. A high overcast even cut out the glow from the stars. The pilot and co-pilot were awake, but really weren't concentrating on looking for other aircraft, because they had just passed into the San Juan Oceanic Control Area, and they had been advised by radio that there were no other airplanes in the area. The co-pilot was turning around to look at number 4 engine when he noticed a light up ahead. It looked like the tail light of another airplane. He watched it closely for a few seconds, since no other airplanes were supposed to be in the area. He glanced out at number 4 engine for a few seconds, looked back, and he saw that the light was in about the same position as when he'd first seen it. Then he looked down at the prop controls, synchronized the engines, and looked up again. In the few seconds that he had glanced away from the light, it had moved to the right so that it was now directly ahead of the DC-4, and it had increased in size. The co-pilot reached over and slapped the pilot on the shoulder and pointed. Just at that instant, the light began to get bigger and bigger until it was 10 times the size of a landing light of an airplane. It continued to close in, and with a flash it streaked by the DC-4's left wing. Before the crew could react and say anything, 2 more smaller balls of fire flashed by. Both pilots later said that they sat in their seats for several seconds with sweat trickling down their backs. It was one of these 2 pilots who later said, "Were you ever traveling along the highway about 70 miles an hour at night, have the car that you were meeting suddenly swerve over into your lane, and then cut back so that you just miss it by inches? You know the sort of sick, empty feeling you get when it's all over? That's just the way we felt." As soon as the crew recovered from the shock, the pilot picked up his mic, called Jacksonville radio, and told them about the incident. Minutes later, we had the report. The next afternoon, Lieutenant Kerry Rothstein, who had replaced Lieutenant Metcher on the project, was on his way to New York to meet the pilots when they returned from Puerto Rico. When Kerry talked to the 2 pilots, they couldn't add a great deal to their original story. Their final comment was the one we all had heard so many times. "I always thought these people who reported flying, I don't know." When Lieutenant Rothstein returned to Dayton, he triple-checked with the CAA for aircraft in the area, but there were none. Could there have been airplanes in the area that CAA didn't know about? The answer was almost a flat no. No one would fly 600 miles off the coast without filing a flight plan. If he got into trouble or went down, the Coast Guard or Air Rescue Service would have no idea where to look. Kerry was given the same negative answer when he checked on surface shipping. The last possibility was that the UFOs were meteors, but several points in the pilot's story ruled these out. First, there was a solid overcast at about 18,000 feet. No meteor cruises along straight and level below 18,000 feet. Second, on only rare occasions have meteors been seen traveling free in trail. The chances of seeing such a phenomenon are well over 1 in a billion. Some people have guessed that some kind of an atmospheric phenomenon can form a wall of air ahead of an airplane that will act as a mirror, and that lights seen at night by pilots are nothing more than the reflection of the airplane's own lights. This could be true in some cases, but to have a reflection you must have a light to reflect. There are no lights on an airplane that even approach being 10 times the size of a landing light. What was it? I know a colonel who says it was the same thing that the 2 Eastern Airlines pilots, Clarence Childs and John Whitted, saw near Montgomery, Alabama on July 24,